tonight, we're talking about Yemen and the Gulf Cooperation Council Iranian relations. So many things flow out from that and unanswered questions, and so we can look forward to tonight's presentation with great interest. Dr. Anthony knows that part of the world well. His education, his master's degree was from Georgetown, emphasizing international relations in the Middle East, and his PhD from Johns Hopkins School of International Studies with the same kind of emphasis. He was a Fulbright to what was then People's Republic of Yemen quite a while ago. He's also at the first 4 presidential and parliamentary elections, an observer of those elections. He has many unique ties to that part of the world. He's been the only American invited to the Gulf Cooperation Council ministerial and heads of state meetings since 1981, the only one invited to all of them. The association which he's had with Arab leaders, given the role that he plays, his primary role among many, but the primary role as president of the Council, the U.S. Council on Arab-American Relations, connects him constantly to that part of the world. And he deals with the leadership within those societies on a regular basis. In addition to being a deep student of those affairs, he's written 3 books, co-edited one, and has 150 articles on various phases of the area. So he's a deep student as well as being deeply experienced. But he knows the American side as well. He's led 200 congressmen on their fact-finding tours, along with their staffs and the rest, to that part of the world. He's been the scholar leader of over about 150 different officers who have been assigned to the generals of Central Command. And through all of that, of course, accumulates experience. He's lectured at the State Department, at the Defense Department, with the CIA. He's shared his knowledge with not only classes at SAIS and Georgetown, but as a visiting professor or adjunct professor at a number of other institutions, Oxford Center for Arab Studies, Virginia, Pennsylvania, and others. So he knows the area, he's experienced in it, and he knows American foreign policy. He's been good enough, as I said, to share his knowledge with a variety of academic institutions, and this is the 12th time in over 30 years that John has addressed us. 12 different times, each one of them a memorable, deeply informed presentation on different aspects of our never-endingly interesting Middle East. It's my great pleasure to present Dr. John Duke Anthony.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's always a pleasure for me to be here, and a privilege and an honor as well. Sometimes after I listen to Dr. Frank Bird, I wonder how can he do it again? And I wish that my mother was here just one time, because he's done it all of these times. And that, yes, this is my 12th or the 13th time. 13 may be the charm. It's reflective of who and what you are and where you are. This is a regimen. This is a ritual. This is something regular here. And those are the 3 R's, but not the ordinary 3 R's of what you have done as a World Affairs Council. We've been privileged at the nonprofit, non-governmental foundation that I had to work with some 66 of the World Affairs Councils. Last count I had was 96. And when I say work with them, we've taken their presidents, their chairmen, their CEOs, their board of directors, their prominent members, their program chair people from all over the United States. And we recognize that you, along with the members of the Foreign Policy Association, represent about 90% of the private space in terms of American citizens with regard to information, with regard to insight, with regard to knowledge, with regard to understanding, and with regard to capacities to have critical analysis on our country's role in the world beyond our shores. And you're not bereft of a blemish here in the sense of maybe not always utilizing talent in your midst. I'm aware that here this evening is Dr. Byrd himself, who I met perhaps some 25, 30 years ago. And correct me if I'm wrong, Frank, we took you to Oman, is that correct there? Where Bishop Aubrey Hurley, I believe, we took to Oman more recently, and Dr. Linda Funch, who's here this evening also. And you have someone no less than Dr. Robert Friedman, who is long-standing and an icon at the Baltimore Hebrew College, and we've been colleagues, conference bumps before, sat on the same dais, and we're roughly the same age, although he's about, as you can see, 15 or 20 years older than I. just playing. He's had plastic surgery and I've not. And agreeing with Frank to be with you this evening there was a focus on Yemen. And Yemen is an extraordinary country. When people ask me of the 22 Arab countries, the 28 Middle Eastern countries, the 57 Islamic countries, which one have you found to be the most fascinating over your 53 years of being engaged with this region, its peoples, its cultures, and its dynamics? And I've always said Yemen, which I've been privileged to visit some 25 times, and visit at some length with the late President Ali Abdullah Saleh, who was killed by his erstwhile allies last December when I was in the region and at a Heads of State summit. I've been privileged, as I think Frank made allusion to be the only American permitted and allowed to be present at the creation and at every head of state and foreign ministers meeting from its inception in May of 1981 until the present. So Yemen is in a category by itself. It's really not to be compared to this country. It's more to be contrasted with all of them. Could I see a hand if there's anyone here who's been to Yemen? Wow, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right in the middle, too, which Yemen is oftentimes in the middle of things itself. But this is like being in a university from which there's no possible graduation, only a series of incompletes on a very successful day. Now, if you look at this map, which is very important, and I believe you were handed out individual maps. No, I see people shaking their head left to right, which usually means no. So we'll use this map. I hope the camera can zero in on it. Think of Yemen's shape as Louisiana or a boot. And because the sole of one's feet is not something that conjures up dignity and civility in Arab and Islamic culture, we'll go with the Louisiana analogy here, or metaphor. And see if you'll bear with me on, this is a brush over now to show you why it's so complicated. So why, if you went to the library, you'd find so few books about it, and yet it's the oldest of all the Arab countries. All the Arabs come from Yemen, by the way, all right? As far to the west is Mauritania, Morocco, and to the east, as far as Muscat, and north to Berbera, and south to Baghdad, rather, and south to Berbera, and in between them all, Algiers to Aden, and Alexandria and Aleppo in between them. But Yemen is the fount, is the headquarters, the origins of them all. Now, up at the top, around where the ankle would be on a boot, at the top of Louisiana, would be the most mountainous, rugged terrain of any Arab country. No Arab country comes close. Remotely distant would be Morocco, with the upper Atlas, the middle Atlas, the lower Atlas, and Morocco, in another sense, being on the Mediterranean and the Atlantic Ocean. Yemen is on the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean there. I can take you there for the 5 or 6 who've been there with me or separately, and we can stand on one mountaintop and slowly turn around 360 degrees and see about 40 or 50 other mountaintops, at each one of them 10,000, 11,000 feet. And there are no roads connecting any of them. And so imagine if you lived on the top. There is no road, there's no electricity, there's no plumbing, there's not an inch of sewage pipe. And so the hardy ones amongst you, the women of course, would be going down and back up every single day of the year, not through exercise regimens, but because they have no choice. And they could live all their life, work all their life, and never see anyone from any of the other 39 mountaintop people. And all of those on that one mountain would marry into each other there. So they would be closer knit than marriages in most places elsewhere. Already, it sounds as though I'm describing something that may be more akin to the moon than something on terra firma. Then come down a bit to what would be the Achilles tendon there. And this is on the easternmost side of the Red Sea, right above something called the Bab el-Mandeb. Bab in Arabic is gate, gateway, door. El-Mandeb is tears, and so this is the Gate of Tears. Across it to Africa is about 7 to 9 miles. Be prepared in the future to see some bridge being built from Africa to Yemen. Some of the more cynical but realistic in the short term say, well, that would be to build a bridge from 0 to 0. Why would people do that? There, or down to down, subtraction to subtraction. But no, it'll come. Once the economies of these polities get their act together, of course it'll come. And imagine what it'll do for the regional dynamics of those on both sides of the Red Sea. But on the east side, in control of it now, is an element of those up there higher in the lower leg, spell the Houthis, Houthis. They're not a place so much as a family. They are a tribe. Themselves, they call themselves the Ansar Allah, the Friends of the Almighty there. And they are between Sana'a, the capital of the country, and a place called Saada, S-A-A-D-A-H. Dr. Baird mentioned that I've been an election observer to all of Yemen's presidential and parliamentary elections, the only American thus far so fortunate. And I remember at the last one, they asked me, where would you like to go? Because you've been everywhere else over the years. And I said, I'd like this time to go to Saada. And they stared a hole at me there, and they didn't use the phrase, but I remembered it later when I heard the phrase. What kind of a stupid is that there? So this is their headquarters, their ancestral land, so to speak, but they've spread out from it And their original gripes and grievances were legitimate, realistic. And for me to say that is problematic and likely to get me into trouble. But here we talked as much as we can, the facts and the truth and reality here. They rose up because they were being marginalized. They were not the only ones, but they were being marginalized, both in terms of attention as well as a percentage of the country's national resources, and particularly their fiscal resources, money for schools, for hospitals, for roads, for clinics, for scholarships, for you name it, the infrastructure of development. So their legitimacies were, their grievances were legitimate, their needs were legitimate, their concerns were legitimate, their interests were legitimate, their aspirations were legitimate. But in a country as poor as Yemen, and it's the poorest of all the Arab countries there were other marginalized groups too. The Jewish Yemenis don't think they do not any longer exist. They do. Though small in number, they're tightly knit, and people are proud of the Yemenis. Most Yemenis are proud of the Jews in their midst and know the intellectual, cultural, and artistic and scientific debt they owe the Yemeni Jews there. But others, Yemenis of African descent, there are at least 1 million of these, who discrimination exists in lands east of us, as well as in Caucasian-oriented America there. So at least 1 million of these had grievances too, that they were overlooked, as did 2 or 3 other groups. But the Houthis took matters into their hands and rose up in the late 1990s to make an issue out of it in the government in Sana'a, thinking that, well, if we adopt a policy of appeasement towards these, what are we going to do with regard to the 4 or 5 other groups that have the same issue? So the government fought them back, and when there's fighting with armaments, somebody's going to be hurt. This collateral damage is a nice grown-up, out-of-town word for something that diplomatically might be called bullshit there, and so they wouldn't be spared that. And the government decided to take them on. But they had to take them on over and over and over and over again. And ultimately, the Houthis turned on the president, who had played ball with them from time to time, and they killed him last December, right when I was at the Heads of State Summit. How's that for timing there? And the issue of Yemen was on the agenda at that summit. Come down further and to the heel of the boot metaphor, or the bottom of it if you're thinking of Louisiana there, and you're talking about the port of Aden. Now, during the long colonial realm of Queen Victoria, there were 5 crown colonies that she established. And from west to east, they were Gibraltar, Malta, Aden in the middle, then Singapore, then Hong Kong. Only Gibraltar remains, but Aden was at the center of the tiara, the diamond, the jewel of the necklace of Queen Victoria's overseas imperial dominions there. And the British clung to it. And by the way, what I just mentioned as a historical fact, please assimilate that if nothing else. People talk about British colonialism in the Arab world. There was none, except for Aden. 80 square miles. Every place else was a different arrangement, constitutionally, legally. Some were protectorates, some were mandates, some were trusteeships, and some were protected states, and others were condominiums. 5 different arrangements, but only Aden, the colony there. Now, up until the early 1960s, it ranked every year in the top 5 of all the ports on the planet in terms of tonnage handled and ships calling. Quite something, and it's because it's a natural harbor, and it's situated more than any other natural harbor, ideally along the main west-east, east-west trade lines. but only since the opening of the Suez Canal in 1869. Before then, it was a backwater. And when the Israelis invaded Egypt in June of '67 and the Suez Canal was shut for the second time, the first time was in 1956 when the Israelis invaded Egypt the first time there. The second time, the canal stayed shut for 8 years, from '67 to 1975. You can imagine what that did to international trade and commerce and investment and corporate joint ventures, East and West. Not so much American, but among our allies in Europe as well as those in Asia. Now, the Houthis have control over that slice of territory and think, well, that doesn't matter so much. Until tonight, we never heard about the Houthis. And before that, we weren't sure whether Yemen was animal, vegetable, or mineral. But now that he's talking about it, is it important? Yes, it's important because a missile was fired from there on a U.S. naval vessel this last year. Okay. And so that is symbolic enough. And also the Houthis have captured weaponry, Scud missiles and other missiles from the era when the Soviet Union dominated that part of southwestern Arabia from 1967 to 1990. And the first time they hit Riyadh, the capital of Saudi Arabia, that grabbed headlines, but they've done it dozens of times since, and they show no signs of relinquishing that capacity. On top of which, if there's anything true to the metaphor that the appetite expands in the eating, they are not about to relinquish that which they have gained by picking up arms. And they're also overwhelmingly mountainous. The rest of the Yemeni people are not nearly as mountainous. And they are quite adept at sitting up and waiting for government troops to come, government troops that are not nearly as familiar with every inch of the mountains as they are, and just picking them off one by one. We'll wait here till you come, but you're not going to dislodge us, but we will prevent you from trying to dislodge us. So this is problematic, given what I've just mentioned as a body of water. The Soviet Union has looked longingly with lust on it for not just decades, but generations. Its appetite may be satiated somewhat by the gains it's registered in Syria at the eastern Mediterranean. But Moscow's long-term goals have been a warm water port through Iran. Okay, so segueing here to Iran, and the Q&A, you can come back to Yemen all you want to here. The Yemen government makes much ado about the linkage, the legitimate Yemen government, the last one elected in 2006. There hasn't been one since. So it remains the last remaining legitimate elected parliament and government of Yemen. That one has dealt with Iran in subterranean ways, at least through the Houthis. The Houthis, being Shia, by the way, have gone back and forth to Iran for scholarships, for medical treatment, and for political training, but not in the vast numbers that the media would seem to imply or allow one to infer. Nowhere near the vast numbers that Saudi Arabia and some Americans would lead one to believe and infer. The Iranian linkage to Yemen and the concern with regard to Iran in this case leading to Arabia and the Gulf as a whole is different. It has to do with the following, and I'll make a list here. In the case of Yemen, it's that there are Iranians that have gone to Yemen to show the Yemenis how to use advanced missile technology. Tighten a screw here, don't use this particular piece of metal, use another one, use this gadget, not that one, use 3 of these, not 2, and you'll be there. This is the help that they provided. So the numbers are tinier than minuscule despite what the media would seem to imply and allow us to infer. More important is what the media gives short shrift to, and that is Iran's wholly owned subsidiary in Lebanon called Hezbollah, the party of God in Arabic, which is overwhelmingly Shia and has been tightly wound with Iranian support now for more than 2 decades, and going back to its foundation largely in 1982 when the Israelis invaded Lebanon in June of that year. So Hezbollah is well-organized, disciplined, and armed and serious, and it is the de facto power in Lebanon, and more so because it helped the government of Bashar al-Assad in Syria to prevail over the U.S.-backed and Saudi Arabia and other country-backed rebels in Syria seeking to topple the government in Damascus there. So you find Iran's footprint there too. And then you find it again in Baghdad. Now, when I was going to the summits in sort of 1993, 4, and beyond, there would be a sick joke circulated amongst summiteers that, you know, the United States is pretty wise these days. It invaded Iraq, and Iran won without firing a single bullet or shedding a single drop of blood. Go to the library and see if you can find another comparable case where one country that had many of its people saying Iranians are the people we love to hate the most gave such a gift to the people who had quite a few of its citizens saying Americans are the people we love to hate the most. So Baghdad is the best government that Tehran has had in memory. And so you have a belt of geopolitical and geostrategic influence from Tehran through Baghdad, through Damascus, through Beirut, all the way to the Mediterranean. That has not happened since thousands of years before AD. Now, if you are looking at it from an Iranian perspective, would you give that up? And we backed, in my view, the wrong horse or the wrong horses when we backed the rebels in Syria. And I was in the distinct minority of friends and analysts and adversaries and critics, too, for not saying that the rebels are going to win. And I thought, no, they're not. How on earth could they possibly win? I've been lucky enough to go to Syria 25 times, taken 400 Americans there, half of them students, half of them educators and members of Congress and their staff there. But the aspect of Syria in terms of Iran has to do with something that Iran is not about to give up, because the Syrian regime is also Shia, or an offshoot of Central Shiism as such. And they are beleaguered. They're about 8% of the population as a whole. Now, believe it or not, their main source of allies are Syria's Christians. Okay? Pause for effect on that one there. Syria has 17 Christian sects. If pressed, I can name them all. There. But they too are a minority. At their largest, they've been around 10%. And minorities tend to stick together, or at least explore the possibilities of sticking together to find common ground. And the common ground between the two is that if we don't stick together, we'll hang separately. Sort of Ben Franklin coming back at us there. In terms of the total of them being no more, at most, if you're charitable numerically, than 20%. But 20% is certainly greater than 8% on one hand and 10% on the other. So every time I've taken a group into the presidential palace in Damascus, look left, look right, look behind me, look in front of me, there is this Christian, that Christian, this Christian, that Christian, this Christian, that Christian there. I don't think you've read about that, or maybe you haven't read about that, but that's an aspect of all of this too. to lend to the complexity to which Dr. Bird was alluding here. Now, just for the sake of analysis and argument, let's see if we could put ourselves in the shoes of an Iranian strategist or geopolitician. We have to win, Frank? And we have to win?
Whatever is comfortable.
Pardon? Yes, but it's 20 to 7 now. Want me to stop at 7?
That'd be good.
Okay.
If that's comfortable for you.
It is. Anything's comfortable for me. Want to go to 8, 9?
Some of us would.
All right, we'll go to 7 and see how it goes. Looks there. And here I'm putting on my Iranian hat. And I think this is important for all of us. We Americans have not been accused in the court of public opinion, or let alone in the magistrate of morality, of being in surplus on the empathy front there. We demand that everybody else put themselves in our shoes, but the idea that we put ourselves in their shoes, gee, what kind of a stupid do you think we are? There, doesn't everybody speak English who's looking for technology and defense and fiscal and economic prowess and scientific and technological prowess and military power? Come on, it's all in English, isn't it? So why should we put our shoes in souls, psychology and situations into the reality of others? It's because it is key to understanding. And if we don't do that, that's a recipe for disaster on the analytical front. So I was privileged to live and work in Iran. I've only met 2 other people in my 5 years of getting an incomplete here who have specialized on both sides, Iranian studies and Arab studies. Maybe Dr. Friedman is one of those exceptions, but we've not had a conversation along those lines yet. And so I lived with an Iranian family, a Shia family. I had 2 Iranian sisters, an Iranian brother, an Iranian mother, an Iranian father. They were all Shia. They took me with them to the mosque. They explained this, that, and the other to me. I had breakfast, lunch, and dinner with them for 4 months, nonstop. We went all around the country together, 2 sisters and a brother. I told my wife this. She sort of gives it a false, studied laugh when I do, that my 2 sisters were the most beautiful I'd ever seen up to that time. And they would sit at different ends of the table when we had a meal. My brother would sit in the middle, and one of the beautiful ones would sit at this end, another at that end. And I swear something happened to my ophthalmology there. I could never decide which one to look at the least for politeness and which one to look at the most for lustness there. They were 14, 16 years old, and I was not a whole lot older than that. But this is just to show you I was on the inside and privileged in the extreme. So I'm thinking as an Iranian then and now. And the Iranians were not in love with, I'm stereotyping here, because there are millions of Iranians who are Arabs in the southwest part of Iran, where most of the oil has been found. It's under Arab soil, okay? Life is not geologically kind or democratic either there. So most of the Iranian decision makers and policy makers have not been in love with Arabs, in part because they believed that they had a flowering, flourishing civilization, and they did. And the Arabs that had less of a recorded flowering culture and civilization conquered them, and left them with Islam, and they've been Muslims ever since. So that has not set well with Iranians who know their history and would like to roll back the tides of history there. And it so happens that the Israelis have not been very fond of Arabs either, as opponents, as critics, as adversaries, as contesters to the Israeli grand geostrategic gain of acquiring more territory and resources than they've acquired thus far. Then this is a reason, argue some, as to why Israel has refused to demarcate its national boundaries. One of the few countries on the planet that has refused. And the conclusion in the minds of some is because, well, they're not finished. There's more yet that they intend to take before they do so. So when I lived in Iran, the anti-Arab aspect was clear and obvious there, as it was in Israel. I've been all over Israel, as some of you know this from previous gettings together. I've lived on a kibbutz to force myself to try to see things from inside an Israeli perspective, or the perspective of some Israelis there. And this was the time of Gamal Abdel Nasser. Now, the older crowd here will remember that Nasser was charismatic. He was an Arab leader. He expropriated the Suez Canal. He was a hero from Morocco to Muscat. He restored dignity to millions of Arabs, and his funeral had more than 1 million mourners there that bore his casket. Lord George Brown, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, was one of his pallbearers, by the way. And people say, what did he just say? And he said what he just said. There, I met with Lord George Brown the day after, and he told me this and why. He was proudly a pallbearer of Nasser's casket at Nasser's funeral there. They had been friends secretly since 1954. Okay, so both the Israelis and the Iranians feared as their greatest nightmare that America one day would tilt away from the Shah then in the eastern Middle East, and Israel in the center of the Middle East towards the 22 Arab countries, if only for numerical reasons, if only for geographical reasons. Look at that swath of territory from Morocco to Muscat, Baghdad to Berbera. I mean, Israel could not even fantasize a swath of territory like that, nor could Iran, nor could the two together if they were joined at the hip there. So if you look at it from an Iranian quasi-ethnic paranoid point of view, and then the fact that they're Shia and the overwhelming vast majority of Muslims are not Shia, you could see where the Iranians would feel threatened, intimidated, maybe bullied, maybe encircled. Maybe it's a question of not whether, but when the non-Iranian world is going to come after us, and who do we have to help us, to befriend us, etc. If you look at it that way, and I'm not making it up, you would see that, my gosh, we've got Iraq now, we've got Syria now, and we've got Lebanon now. And it's not just me making this up. There has been one or more high-ranking Iranian officials who've gone on international television and say, we control 4 Arab capitals now: Sana'a, Yemen, Beirut, Damascus, and Baghdad. Think of how exhilarating, if not loony-toony, that would sound to an Iranian, but strip it away from the flamboyant rhetoric, and it's more true than not true there. But for this audience as well, when we say the Shia crescent, and there's something to be said for that because it's gimmicky, it's a phrase a journalist would like, and an editor would like to stick that up there, Shia crescent there. But what are we talking about? 1.67 billion Muslims now? And I think when people talk about the Sunni-Shia divide, and Frank, you can educate me on this later or now, when people hear the divide, I infer that it's 50-50, or 65-35, or 60-40, or no more than 70-30. No, it's nowhere near that. And people will want to get in a fight with me, and I'll have to put up my dukes here, but rounding them off to the nearest and even numbers, we're talking about 90-10. And okay, there are those who say, no, the Shia 15%. All right, 15%, then it's 85-15. And there are others, U.S. government analysts and others who have access to spooky information that say, no, they're only 8%. Okay, so that's at the demographic level. Let's just shave the difference, 10% and 90%. So keep that in your pipe when we're reading the next time about the Sunni-Shia divide. That's at the demographic level, or if you want to stretch it to the democratic level. But let's look at it through some other lens, governments, sovereignty issues, political independence issues. There are 57 members of the Organization of the Islamic Conference, the highest political body for Muslims worldwide, and there are only 4 Shia governments of those 57, okay? Something's funny there. The others are Sunni, with one exception, and that is Oman. Oman is a third sect, if you will, although Omanis don't like to refer to themselves as a sect. They are Ibadi Muslims, I-B-A-D-H-I, okay? And they existed for 2 generations before there was such a thing as a Shia, okay? So there are 3. One, Oman, different from all the others in some quite fascinating, interesting, and enduring ways, and only 4 Shia governments. So they've had 14 years, they, Shia, to persuade others that, look, we're right, you're wrong, or come over to our side. That they've been unable to do that should say something and ask questions that are worthy of pondering. And also at the individual level, 10, the 10 saying to the 90, look, you guys don't have it, we have it. Come over to our side, it hasn't happened. And it doesn't look as though it's going to happen in all of our collective lifetimes there. So Iranians know this. Those in the region especially know this. But if you're an Iranian, that would add to your sense of encirclement or being threatened. We're not prevailing. And others are letting us know that we've got the wrong message. And they're not buying it. And what are we going to do? Well, what should we do? Should we do anything? So far, we haven't been invaded except 6 times by Russia. But not recently by anybody else. And Dr. Friedman could detail the Soviet Union becoming bigger than it was because Iran became smaller than it was, okay? On numerous occasions from the 1790s onward, and if not before, down to the 20th century there. So, if you think you might be invaded, and through the 1990s, they had every reason to believe they were going to be invaded, and I sat in on committees. I'm still a consultant to Uncle Sam and Aunt Samantha there. I sit on believe it or not, I'm a member of the subcommittee of the Advisory Committee on International Economic Policy on sanctions, primarily towards Iran. We dealt with Cuba, Myanmar, and Congo as well, but primarily Iran, okay? So I'm speaking from the inside to the degree I'm allowed to speak from the inside there too. And being a life member of the Council on Foreign Relations since 1986, Cheney, who I'd known from the 1970s, appointed myself and 22 others to a national commission to reassess our policies towards Iraq and Iran. And after the third meeting, he appointed 23 of us. And the other 2 and myself, we would gravitate towards one another because we didn't know any of the other 20. And we thought, just something's funny here. They're all decked out, the women have heels and hose, the men coats and ties. But have you ever met any of them? And none of the 3 of us said, no, we couldn't. And so we thought, well, maybe they know something that we don't know. And so we would meet, we met for 18 months, once a month for 5 hours, 3 o'clock in the afternoon to 8 o'clock at night there. So it was thorough. We'd have a briefer for 30 minutes and then Q&A. And the briefer, the moderator, like Dr. Baird would say, all right, 2 fingers means you want to make a substantive intervention. 1 finger means you just have a rhetorical question. And I'm taking names in order of people's hands going up. After the briefing, boy, our hands would shoot right up, but we were never called upon. We would get up to the point where we'd stand up, and still we weren't called upon. We'd stand up and wave and flap our arms. We weren't called upon. And then once we wound them down, we couldn't come up with any more acts to embarrass the moderators, and they'd said, all right, Dr. So-and-so. And immediately in the audience, somebody else said, time to take a break. We haven't eaten. So we were never engaged for 18 months. After the 3rd meeting, the 3 of us thought, the foundings of this study commission were reached before it began its proceedings. And it was, and they were to invade either Iraq or Iran. And the pro-Israeli crowd wanted to invade Iran first. And this came late in the game, as far into like 2001 and early 2002. We invaded March 19, 2003. And there were members of the commission said, look, we've got it all upside down, inside out, and backwards. We should be invading Iran first and then Iraq. But then the consensus was that we were going to do Iraq there. But ultimately, there were those that said, well, we have it from Cheney that Iran's going to be next. And then in the 2004 election, that was a year after the invasion there, and George W. Bush, his mother just passed, as we know, Laura Yerhama, God bless her soul, realized he had not won numerically the first time around. Indeed, twice in the 21st century, the country that prides itself on being the #1 democracy in the world has had national elections where the person who got the greatest number of votes lost, and the person who got the fewest number of votes won. And George W. Bush was the first one of those. Al Gore got more votes than he did there. So you can see it from his perspective there, that frail, fragile, weak, wavering, teetering, tottering there as to whether he had a good chance to win fair and square this next time around. And he, like Truman and others before him, thought, well, if mouth, at least pejoratively, how's that for a Freudian slip? Rhetorically, the neoconservative pro-Israeli line there, that maybe I'll have a better chance of being reelected there. But that group did believe that Iran would be next, and they also sent emissaries to Riyadh, Cairo, and Damascus saying, you guys are next. We've not yet determined which of you is going to be 3rd, which is going to be 4th, which is going to be 5th, but all 3 of you are going to get it there, unless you come on board with us there. So this is a message that I'm sharing with you from the inside here. Troubling, bothering, and the extreme. But firsthand, I'm not making it up here. I'm not quoting somebody else either, or anybody I overheard. I sat in on these kinds of meetings there. So from an Iranian perspective, you look at the map, we don't have the map, but if we had one, you'd see a figure of a nuclear weapon or tipped missile all around Iran, 360 degrees. Now, if you were an Iranian, what would you do? What would you do? If in your neighborhood, your neighbors to your left and right and front and back all had shotguns, and you were a Quaker or a member of the Friends and didn't have one, what would be your chances of prevailing and maintaining your sovereignty, your political independence, your territorial integrity, if one of the neighbors decided to come after you? Not very great. Okay, so Iran has this frustration and intimidation, this perceived threat, and the rhetoric coming out of the executive branch and members of the Congress as well, that Iran is a member of the axis of evil, okay? And decision makers, policy makers saying, we're not interested per se in regime change in Iran, but we do want to see changed behavior there. And then others would slip and say, yes, indeed, until and unless the regime changes, and they wouldn't say its behavior, we're not going to lighten up any at all. And with the sanctions having been lifted partially as a result of the nuclear agreement, and this took more than 10 years to negotiate, and it started under the George W. Bush administration and not preoccupied, but substantially occupied the Obama administration until the end of the Obama administration. The nuclear agreement, the P5+1, the P being the United States, Great Britain, France, China, and the Soviet Union, plus Germany on one hand and Iran on the other. Now, Iran felt ganged up on, and it signed the agreement, and even in accordance with the statement of Mike Pompeo, it has fully complied with the agreement until now, as have most of the others, including the International Atomic Energy in Paris there. But President would have none of it, and he has threatened more than once now to withdraw the United States from it. And this has bothered friend and foe alike, that what has happened on the banks of the Potomac with regard to a country whose government we had become accustomed to being able to plan around, to predict around, to anticipate around, to prepare around. And here we just don't know from one day to the next, or sometimes one tweet to the next, what we should do. Put more money in the bank, take all of our money out of the bank, put it under the bed, put it under somebody else's head. We're all confused about this. So trust in the United States has waned amongst the countries, including the GCC countries. They are Kuwait, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, and Oman. Now I'll stop and take, if I've not taken too much of your time, and I'll take questions if I've provoked any or promoted any. Yes, good question. I'll take the last part of it and work towards the front. Hamas is not just a gun-toting group with being adept at explosives and terroristic acts and acts of violent extremism. It's also the legitimately elected government of Gaza. I've been an international election observer 4 times in my life now, for the Democrats, for the Republicans, for the International Foundation of Electoral Systems and governments in the region there. And President Carter was an observer of that one. I was not. But it was, and the gold standard is free and fair. That's what the people who organize an election and allow people to look at it close up want at the end. And the observers meet, and they keep notes, and they have a scorecard and check boxes here, about 30 different things that they're looking for to see if they were done correctly or in accordance to the highest of standards. And Gaza got the next best thing of open and transparent. You can say that they're playing around with words here, and maybe they are, but it's words other than free and fair. But overwhelmingly, it got an A, if free and fair is an A+. So it is the government, means it is over the schools, it's over the sewers, it's over the waters, it's over environment, it's over cleanliness, it's over sanitation, it's over this, that, and the other, in addition to using armed force in search of what it believes, probably correctly, they're not likely to get any other way, namely national sovereignty, political independence, and territorial integrity. So you're moving up towards the macro question of Qatar and Saudi Arabia smoochy with the Israelis here, you can use these kinds of phrases: marriages of convenience, or courtships of convenience, scratching at one another's back, or quid pro quos, that the Israelis, I think, have overrated the extent of this, the nature of it, and the implications of this. And this gives you insight into an Israeli sense of insecurity and intimidation. And when will we be accepted? When will we be recognized? When will we be able to push the horrors of the Holocaust further back in the rearview mirror? When, if ever? And so there's a degree of almost transparent, certainly palpable desperation. When? In my lifetime? Or when? Why not in my lifetime? So this is how it would be seen within the region by non-Israelis, but maybe some Israelis too. And on the Arab side, they play this down, that, look, don't read too much into this and don't read that much into this, etc. We are at this juncture in our history where there is a convergence of needs, a convergence of interests, a convergence of concerns, a convergence of aspirations. And on all four of these, it's to contain Iran, to deter Iran, to keep Iran in a box, to not give Iran the benefit of the doubt, etc. We Arabs, Saudi Arabia and Qatar, and all of them in that region have this as an interest. And you Israel have this interest too. So why don't the two of us try insulting each other less than we've been accustomed to do, and look for areas where we can possibly cooperate to the mutuality of benefit of ourselves, or to the reciprocity of reward of ourselves. Why not? Why not? Can we live with this? Let's try and see how it goes, see what we can do. So on the Arab side, far less. On the Israeli side, too much. And whether the truth is somewhere in between, I'm not able to say. But I don't think it has depth. I don't think it has what people would say are legs. I don't see the likelihood of any Arab normalization of relations with Israel until and unless there is a nationally sovereign, politically independent, territorially intact state of Palestine, alongside a free and independent, secure, nationally sovereign, politically independent, and territorially intact Israel. That's the red line. And they're unanimous on this. March 31st, 2001 or 2. In Beirut. All Arab governments were there with their sovereigns or their sovereigns designees. And they laid out that we are willing and ready to have the normalization of relations with Israel, including the establishment of diplomatic relations, as soon as that basic criteria is met. And they would say, we're not asking for the moon. We're asking for ending this sordid chapter that is paying both peoples beyond description. And the Holocaust Museum here, congratulations on having it, could add that as one of the contributions to the best of the best amongst Arabs and Jews, to put this conflict to bed.